Most people think they make money decisions based on numbers, but that's not true. We make decisions based on stories, usually ones that we didn't choose. I was just at a business conference that I traveled to in Florida, and while I was there, we spoke on stage for about an hour. This was a conference that had about 3 to 350 people there. Last minute, actually, so the morning of, I decided to make some changes to the presentation that I was giving, and I completely eliminated my typical process of teaching, and I went solely off of a story that I had been thinking about for the last week or so, and decided to turn most of the presentation into this story. Today, we are going to talk about that story. We're going to talk about how it relates to your financial picture and get into a little bit of your own story so that you can start to discover why you make the financial decisions that you do. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Before the Returns. I'm your host, Jaden Zubal, and I'm looking forward to talking about money stories today and how they affect your life. So stick with us for the next 10, 15 minutes, and I will walk you through how stories impact us and how you can use your story to better your financial picture and better your future story with your family. Because really, when we look at it, if you don't understand your story with your money, if you don't understand how you got to that place, it doesn't matter what financial strategy you try to implement or what you try to do, it's not going to work. It won't work until you get the big picture. Okay, so this conference that I attended, I've done this one now actually for a couple of years. I know the owners of it quite well, and we spent a good amount of time together. They are clients of mine, and they're great people. When I went down to this conference, typically how these work is we will go in and speak on their stages, help their clients out. Many of my clients are clients of theirs as well now, and vice versa. And a lot of this is because they are incredible storytellers. The owners do a great job of sharing their story and how they got into the place that they're in today. And this resonates very well with people, rightfully, right? Because if you think about our lives in general, just think about when you're sitting and you're scrolling through TikTok or Instagram, or you're just spending the afternoon doing nothing, let's say. When you're doing that, what is it that stops you? What stops you on a post? What makes you willing to spend 15 seconds or 2 minutes, however long that one is? What makes you willing to spend that time on that post? Why are you watching it? Typically, we watch because we get interested in the story, right? Somebody has said something, they've created a hook that has got us engaged in the first couple of seconds there and wanting to know more about their story. What is their story and how does it impact me? In the financial space, you've probably seen this. If you're out there watching YouTube videos and different posts on social media with finance, many people in finance, myself included, we're not always great at telling stories. What we do a good job at most of the time is showing numbers and being analytical because that's how we got to where we're at. That is a part of our story. But we're missing the big picture. And I'm speaking to myself here as much as anybody else. So I had this epiphany over the last week of when I went to this event, I was actually sitting in kind of their green room, just hanging out, waiting for the time when we would go up on stage and do our thing. And I hadn't actually finished, I had finished the presentation that I wanted to give, and I had a pretty good idea of what we wanted to talk about. But in just the 3 hours before we spoke, I pretty much rewrote the entire thing, changed the entire thing. And I did it because I was having a conversation with somebody sitting there, and we're just talking about the day, talking about what we're going to go over with people and how we can best engage the audience. This is something that I think we forget about a lot, but when you're trying to engage an audience, when you're trying to engage people, and I know that's not what this podcast is typically about, but it does apply to our financial picture. So when you're trying to engage people, you have to remember that people are emotional beings. We respond to emotion, and we respond to the things that directly impact our lives and make us feel things. And what I did is I changed the presentation pretty significantly, got rid of all of the teaching, all of the education, because we can do that more on a one-on-one basis. And I turned it into, let me tell this story. Let me help people understand how I got here. And by doing so, I believe that we can create a connection that allows for people to feel and think about their own stories. Okay? And so that's how we got to where we're at today with this podcast is I want to help you as my audience do the same thing. I want to help you connect with your own story and put some real thought into why you make the financial decisions that you do. What is it that has caused you to make the decision to save money if you do that, or to spend everything you make immediately if you do that, right? What is it that causes you to want to save for vacations or to want to help a family member or a friend? Or what is it that makes you want to do the opposite, right? We all have these internal triggers, many of which we don't understand, but these internal triggers govern a lot of our lives. They also govern whether we're open to making financial changes or financial decisions. Going to take a wild guess here and say that if you're listening to this podcast or if you're watching this on YouTube, probably are at least open to financial changes and financial strategies because you made it this far. So that tells you that part of your story has enabled you to want to do things differently. Now, let me just spend the next couple of minutes and briefly share my story so that you can understand how I'm thinking about this, and maybe it'll give you some insight into where your story lies. Okay, so my story starts back when I was a year and a half, 2 years old, before I even have any memories. But it's important to understand that my parents divorced when I was very young. And when this happened, I spent most of my life living with my dad and my grandparents. I spent a little bit of time with my mom here and there, but she had some struggles that she was dealing with, and it never really worked where we were able to spend a lot of time there. Now, fast forward a few years, and I'm 7 years old. I'm standing in the hallway at my dad's house, and we used to have the phones that hung on the wall, right? And you'd have a big long cord that would allow you to walk 20, 30 feet in either direction. So you could walk around the house a little bit. But I'm standing there in the hallway and I'm on the phone, and the person on the other end of the line is my mom. And she says something like, "Hey, buddy, can I borrow $40?" All right. And now imagine this as a 7-year-old. Imagine your 7-year-old body standing in a little hallway, and you had just finished playing with your toys. You had just finished running around the house, being crazy, doing what 7-year-olds do. And you're excited, you're having a good day. And then your mom asks you for $40. At that point in life, it's hard to really understand what $40 means, right? But what you do understand and what you do feel is, hey, if my mom is asking me for money, this must mean that there's a problem, right? Something doesn't feel right about this. Something doesn't feel like this is how life is supposed to be, right? She's asking me for money. I'm very young. I have a very minimal understanding of money. So she must need help, right? There's something that she needs that I, in my 7-year-old body, in my 7-year-old mind, I want to figure out a way to help. And so that's what I did. I continued to do that kind of stuff. And as I got older, it became more and more obvious to me that she needed financial help and financial resources because she didn't have the right tools and the right understanding of how to manage her money and how to make wise financial choices. So, continuing throughout the rest of my childhood and into adulthood, I was typically asked to help support and provide different resources and things for her. This shaped much of my financial journey. It shaped a lot of how I ended up being in the place that I'm in today. Really, even me being in front of you guys, me being able to be here and speak about these things and talk to you about this. I can do it, and I can do it confidently because I was pushed through this journey to get here. I was really guided in a way. So I don't look at this story today as much of a negative thing as I used to. There were many years that I tried to just forget about a lot of those memories. But today I can look at it, I can remember the whole thing vividly, and I can apply it in a way that says, okay, that is my financial journey. It is what brought me through my childhood to where I sit today and to many of the really good decisions that I've been able to make to put my family in a better position and enable us to live a much better, much more secure financial life. And all of that comes long before the financial strategy. It comes before a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast, a lot of the things that you'll hear from other financial people on the internet. You'll hear from wealth advisors, things like that. So I'm really trying to take us back for a minute and say, let's, spend some time this week and think about what are the things that have impacted you financially. Why do you make the decisions you do? Sometimes it's good just to take a second, step back, and think about that for a moment. Until we think about that and put some intention behind it, you may not be able to implement strategies because we are trained, right? Our brains are trained to do certain things after decades of having these sort of internal pressures and memories that continue to push us subconsciously. So we have to figure those things out. Then we can start to push through them. So just like in my story, I didn't see how these early decisions were being made because of the story. Things like my choices of where I went to college and why I went to college, or the fact that I got my first job as early as I possibly could so that I could start making money, so that I could buy a car, so that I could have some financial control over my life because I didn't feel like I had any control up to that point. And I also felt this intense desire to help support other people, which I didn't recognize for a very long time why I had that. Now I can trace it back to being 7 years old on the phone and being asked for money. I can start to put those pieces of the puzzle together, but it took really sitting back and thinking about, and to be honest, it took me trying to think of how I can better help you guys and better give resources and guidance that is actually going to make a difference in your financial world. It took me really putting some deep thought into that before I could answer these questions and figure out these stories for myself. So we're talking 20, 25 years before I figured it out. So it takes a long time. And my hope is by sharing a little bit of this, I can help you guys start to figure out the same thing, maybe sooner. Or it's like that old Chinese proverb, right? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. So even if we could have fixed it 20 years ago, why not try and fix it now? Why not try to figure these things out now so that we can break patterns and habits or things that have negatively impacted our financial life and start to implement the things that will help us positively? So the real truth about money problems is that it usually doesn't come down to things like intelligence or discipline. Some of the wealthiest people I know, I wouldn't say that they are smarter than anybody else out there. I wouldn't even always say that they're more disciplined than everyone else out there. Although discipline does play a big role in things, it doesn't mean that the guy who has less money is less disciplined. What I am saying, though, is that old stories from our past, the things that came up when we were very young, start to show up in our behavior. And doesn't matter at that point how intelligent we are, how disciplined we are. If we don't understand our behavior and understand why we subconsciously make the decisions that we do, we're oftentimes going to naturally fall back into these other patterns. You have to have an extreme level of discipline to push through patterns without understanding the patterns. What that really comes down to for us is that I can tell you all the systems in the world. I can show you all these different ways to be strategic with your money. They're not going to actually help you if we don't sit back and understand stories. Let's get back to human nature for a minute. And just understand that we need to have a clear picture of our personal stories so that we can make progress. So, if I could leave you with anything today, I have 3 simple questions that are worth sitting back and reflecting on a little bit. It'd be great to hear back from you guys, hear your stories. I'd love to discuss that with you if you want to send me a message or post it in the comments. But the questions I think are worth pondering are: what did money feel like for you growing up? What was learned without words? Think back to how you felt. The reason you have specific memories is because you felt certain things in those moments. There may not have been a lot of words said, but you still felt what was happening. And where does that show up now? So think back to specific memories. And again, the questions are: what did money feel like growing up? What was learned without words? And then where does that show up now in your life? Okay, we'd love to hear from you. And if this message is helping you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. It really helps our channel grow. And with that, I hope you guys have a great week, and we will talk to you next week on the show.